She organized an entire school event like it was a gala. Flowers, lights, programs, everything perfect. Parents whispered in awe, but when I Googled her name later that night, my phone slipped from my hands. She wasn't just Elle. She was Eleanor Summers. Ethan Reynolds had once been the kind of man people expected to see smiling in the streets of Maple Hill. As the town mechanic, he knew almost everyone who came by with a sputtering pickup or a tractor that refused to start. Before, there had always been laughter in his voice, a quiet pride in fixing something broken and handing it back good as new. But those days had ended 2 years ago, when cancer took his wife Laura so quickly that he still sometimes woke in the middle of the night, certain he had heard her humming down the hall. Now, Maple Hill knew him as something else, the widowed father who carried grief like a second shadow. People spoke kindly about him, but their kindness had a sharp edge of pity. Some whispered about how he had stopped smiling, how even at the grocery store, when his little boy asked for candy or clutched his hand, Ethan's eyes seemed far away, fixed on a memory. For Ethan, fatherhood had become a mixture of exhaustion and aching tenderness. He loved Jamie fiercely, loved him with a kind of desperation, as if sheer devotion could make up for everything his son had lost. But every laugh Jamie let out, every bright-eyed question he asked about the world, only carved deeper cracks in Ethan's heart. Because more often than not, those questions circled back to one word Ethan could not give him: Mom. At the kitchen table, Jamie would look up from his cereal and ask softly, "Why don't I have a mommy at the PTA, Daddy?" Or at birthday parties, when every other child was helped by a mother arranging their slice of cake, Jamie would tug at Ethan's sleeve and whisper, "Is it because she didn't like me anymore?" Each time, Ethan's throat closed up, and the only answer he could manage was to hold his boy tighter and say, "No, buddy. She loved you more than anything." But children are sharp. They feel absence in ways adults try to cover. Jamie was bright, curious, and full of life, but he noticed what was missing. He noticed when his classmates held hands with their mothers at the Christmas choir, when they ran into their arms at the playground. And he noticed that his father, despite all his effort, could never quite fill that space. For Ethan, the hardest moments came at night. Jamie often woke from dreams, calling out, sometimes reaching for someone who wasn't there. Ethan would rush in, kneel by his son's small bed, stroke his hair, and whisper that everything was okay. But inside, he felt hollow. Because no matter how much love he poured out, he couldn't give what he didn't have. He could fix engines, repair broken parts, weld metal until it held, but he couldn't mend the one fracture that mattered most. That was the quiet reality of their life. The town saw a hard-working single father. But Ethan knew the truth. He was a man trying to hold together both his son's heart and his own, with nothing but tired hands and the memory of a woman who had been their center. And though Jamie smiled often enough, each time he reached for someone else's hand in a crowd, Ethan felt something inside him falter, as if he were watching his boy look for light in a place Ethan could no longer reach. It was a rare Saturday morning when the sky over Maple Hill stretched wide and blue, the kind of day that made children restless and adults feel they ought to be outside whether they wanted to or not. Ethan had taken Jamie to the park, more out of duty than desire. He carried a paper sack with sandwiches and a thermos of lemonade, while Jamie darted ahead, his little legs full of energy. Ethan found a bench under a tree, telling himself he'd keep his son in view while letting his own mind drift. But the moment his gaze wandered toward the baseball field, Jamie's small voice rang out in a way that made Ethan's stomach twist. "Mommy." Ethan froze. He knew the tone, that mixture of hope and certainty. He looked up to see Jamie running toward a woman sitting alone on a stone bench near the pond, scattering breadcrumbs to the pigeons. She wore a suit the color of fresh snow, too fine for their small-town park, her posture graceful but relaxed as if she belonged nowhere and everywhere at once. By the time Ethan reached him, Jamie was already standing in front of her, head tilted back, eyes shining. "Will you be my mommy for a day?" the boy asked, the words tumbling out as if they had been waiting inside him for weeks. "Just today? Just until my daddy isn't so sad anymore." Ethan's face flushed hot. "Jamie," he hissed, reaching for his son's hand. "I'm so sorry, ma'am. He didn't mean." But the woman had already set aside the small paper bag of breadcrumbs. Her eyes, a startling green that seemed both sharp and kind, flicked from Jamie to Ethan. For a long moment, She said nothing, and Ethan felt as though the ground beneath him might give way. Then she smiled. A smile quiet but real, like someone who hadn't forgotten how, just hadn't had cause to use it in a long while. She knelt down so she was eye level with Jamie, the immaculate white fabric brushing the grass, and said simply, "Why not?" Ethan's mouth went dry. "That's really not necessary," he began. But Jamie was already laughing, clutching the woman's hand as if they had known each other forever. The next hours blurred in a way Ethan hadn't felt in years. They walked the park's winding paths, shared sandwiches, and watched Jamie race across the playground equipment with a joy that made other mothers glance their way and whisper. Ethan trailed behind, half guard, half witness, unsure if he should be grateful or furious that someone had stepped so easily into a space Laura used to fill. At one point, Jamie insisted they all sit together on the grass. He leaned against the woman's shoulder, eating the last of the lemonade damp sandwiches, crumbs clinging to his shirt. Ethan tried to make light conversation, asking her name. She only said, "Call me Elle." Her answer was so brief, so practiced, that Ethan let the silence swallow the rest of his questions. He wanted to thank her, to explain, to apologize all over again, but words kept slipping away. He only noticed how Jamie's laughter rang out brighter than it had in months. By late afternoon, Ethan decided it was time to end whatever this was. He stood, brushed off his jeans, and said, "We should get going." Jamie's had enough excitement for one day. The boy clung stubbornly to Elle's hand. "But she promised," Jamie protested. "She promised to stay." Ethan's chest tightened. He tried to coax his son gently, but Elle only nodded, as if making a private vow. "Don't worry," she said softly, glancing up at Ethan with an expression he couldn't read. "I'll see you again next weekend." And somehow, though he didn't invite her, though every protective instinct told him to pull away, Ethan felt the words settle in his bones like inevitability. The following Saturday, Ethan told himself not to expect her. He convinced himself that Elle's promise in the park had been little more than a polite farewell, a kindness spoken to soothe a child. But when Jamie woke that morning, he asked without hesitation, "Is she coming today?" The hope in his son's eyes pierced deeper than Ethan wanted to admit. And then, just as the sun climbed high enough to bleach the town square with light, Elle appeared. Same immaculate white clothing, same calm presence, as if she had stepped out of a different world and chosen to sit in theirs for the day. Jamie sprinted toward her, squealing with delight, while Ethan stood in the doorway of the shop, rag in hand, trying to keep his expression neutral. One weekend bled into the next, and soon it was no longer chance but routine. She arrived without fanfare, never announcing herself beforehand. Sometimes she brought a small bag of pastries, sometimes books, sometimes nothing at all but her quiet presence. And Jamie, once restless at night and prone to questions that Ethan could barely answer, began to change. The boy slept more soundly, his nightmares easing. His teachers mentioned improvements at school. He was more focused, more cheerful, less quick to withdraw when other children mentioned their mothers. At home, his laughter filled the rooms with a warmth Ethan hadn't felt since Laura. It wasn't just Jamie. Ethan, despite himself, felt something inside begin to shift. He noticed how the silence in his house no longer pressed so heavily when Elle was there, how the air seemed easier to breathe when Jamie's voice mixed with hers. Against his better judgment, he caught himself watching the clock as Saturday drew closer, his own anticipation betraying him. And yet, the mystery around her clung stubbornly. She spoke little about herself. No family mentioned, no job, no social circle. She had no car that Ethan ever saw. Once, when he asked about her work, she only smiled faintly and changed the subject, redirecting Jamie's attention with a storybook. One afternoon, while Jamie raced toy trucks across the kitchen floor, Ethan leaned against the counter and asked, "Why do you always wear white?" "I mean," he gestured awkwardly, "it's not exactly practical." For a moment, something flickered in her expression. Then she said, in a voice softer than usual, "Because I spent most of my life in black." She turned away before Ethan could ask more, crouching down to help Jamie with his game. The answer lodged in Ethan's mind like a puzzle piece that didn't yet fit. He told himself not to trust her, not to let her deeper into their lives. Yet every time Jamie laughed freely in her presence, Ethan's resistance weakened. He knew he was walking a line between caution and surrender, but each week that line blurred. Piece by piece, almost against his will, he found himself allowing her not just into Jamie's world, but into his own. And though Ethan never admitted it aloud, by the third weekend, he realized something dangerous. He was counting the days until she came again. The announcement came tucked in the corner of Jamie's school newsletter. Maple Hill Elementary will host its annual Mothers and Mentors Day in 3 weeks. Ethan skimmed it at the breakfast table, half focused on his coffee, half on the bolts and repair orders already waiting for him at the shop. He was used to these events, occasions that left him quietly dreading Jamie's questions. But before Ethan could fold the paper away, Jamie's face lit up. "Daddy, Elle can come, right? She'll be my mommy for that day." The words sliced deeper than Jamie intended. Ethan opened his mouth, ready to caution him not to hope too much, when Elle herself, who had started arriving unannounced even on weekdays, looked up from tying Jamie's shoelaces. She smiled, gentle and certain. "Of course I'll come." Not only did she come, she transformed the entire event. In the weeks leading up to it, Ethan noticed Elle slipping into meetings at the school office, speaking quietly with teachers, making phone calls on her sleek phone that seemed too polished for their small town. When Ethan asked what she was doing, she only shrugged and said, "Helping." On the day itself, Maple Hill Elementary looked nothing like its usual modest self. Bouquets lined the entryway, delicate lights draped the hallways, and custom-printed programs were handed out by beaming students. The gymnasium had been dressed like a banquet hall, with polished tables, fresh cupcakes, and decorations so elegant that mothers whispered in amazement, asking where the money had come from. And at the center of it all was Elle, dressed, of course, in white. She moved through the crowd with effortless grace, greeting children, tying ribbons, adjusting details as if she had done it 1,000 times before. Jamie clung to her hand with pride, introducing her to teachers as though she had always been his mother. Ethan stood at the edge of the gym, hands shoved deep in his pockets, watching the scene unfold. Something inside him tightened, not suspicion exactly, but the sense that the woman who had walked into their lives so quietly was carrying far more than she ever admitted. The confirmation came hours later, after the local news aired a short segment on the event. Ethan was wiping grease from his hands at the shop when his phone began buzzing. Neighbors, friends, even distant relatives calling, their voices urgent, incredulous. "Do you know who she is?" one of them demanded. "Ethan, do you have any idea?" Puzzled, Ethan searched the name the reporter had spoken so casually, Eleanor L. Summers. The screen lit up with page after page, Forbes, Time, Wall Street Journal. Words like youngest self-made CEO in American tech history and billionaire leapt out at him. He read about her court battle with an ex-husband, about her withdrawal from public life, about the tragedy of a younger sister lost in foster care. Photos accompanied the text, the same striking green eyes, the same impeccable white suits, the same woman now laughing with his son over paper crafts in an elementary school gym. Ethan's hand went slack. His phone slipped from his grip and clattered to the concrete floor of the garage. For a moment, he simply stood there, breath shallow, the pieces colliding too fast in his mind. The elegance, the absence of ordinary details, the guarded silences, all of it suddenly made sense. And with the realization came a flood of emotions, disbelief, betrayal, confusion, and something harder to admit, fear. Because the woman who had been healing his son, who had slipped so quietly into their broken lives, was not simply Elle. She was Eleanor Summers, someone the entire world had once watched. And Ethan had no idea what that meant for them. Ethan waited until Jamie was asleep before asking her. He sat at the kitchen table, arms folded across his chest, staring at the woman who had become part of their Saturdays, their evenings, their lives. She had just tucked Jamie in, her white jacket draped over the back of a chair, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea. For a moment, she looked almost ordinary. But Ethan's phone, still lit with headlines and glossy photos, burned in his pocket like proof of something he didn't want to believe. "Why didn't you tell me?" His voice was low but edged, each word sharp from being held in too long. Elle looked up, her green eyes steady. "Tell you what? Who you are." He leaned forward, the weight of weeks pressing into his tone. "Eleanor Summers, CEO, billionaire, the woman people write articles about. You let my son believe you were just some kind stranger who happened to be there." Her fingers tightened around the mug. For a long moment, she said nothing, as if measuring how much truth she could afford to give. Finally, she whispered, "Because I wasn't pretending." Ethan let out a humorless laugh. "You weren't pretending? You walked into our lives with no explanation, no past, no nothing. And now I find out the truth from the evening news." Her voice cracked, though she kept her composure. "I wasn't hiding to deceive you, Ethan. I was hiding because for the first time in years, I wanted to be real. With you. With Jamie. Not a CEO, not a headline. Just me." He wanted to believe her. God, he wanted to. But pride and fear gnawed at him. He thought of Jamie's innocent trust, of how easily she had stepped into Laura's place, of the possibility that all of it could collapse the moment her other life called her back. "You should have told me," he said again, softer this time, but no less firm. "You should have trusted me enough to say who you really were." Silence stretched between them. She set the mug down gently, as if the sound might shatter the fragile thread holding the conversation together. Her eyes glistened, though she refused to let a tear fall. "I'm sorry," she said finally. "I only wanted to give you both something good. I didn't think. I didn't think it would feel like betrayal." Ethan looked away, jaw tight, unable to speak. The next morning, she was gone. She left no knock on the door, no farewell. Only a small box on the porch, wrapped neatly in white paper. Inside, Ethan found a custom-tailored blue cape, Jamie's name stitched in gold across the back. A folded note lay on top in Elle's elegant handwriting. "Every superhero deserves a cape. Yours is on the way. Love, Mommy for a day." Underneath, another letter, this one addressed to Ethan. His hands trembled as he read words that blurred with tears. "You are the bravest man I have ever met. Raising a boy with nothing but love and strength. If you ever want more, for Jamie or for yourself, you know where to find me." Ethan sat at the kitchen table long after the sun rose. The cape pulled across his lap, his chest heaving with a grief he hadn't felt since Laura's passing. He told himself it was for Jamie's sake, but in the quiet of that morning, he knew the truth. The letter had broken him, because she had written it for him too. The seasons turned. Summer slipped into autumn, and autumn into the first chill of winter. Maple Hill settled into its rhythm, leaves burning orange, shop windows filled with wreaths, the smell of wood smoke drifting through the streets. Ethan worked longer hours at the garage, filling his evenings with grease and distraction. Elle's absence became part of the silence of the house, a silence Ethan tried to wear like armor. Jamie, though, did not forget. At first, he asked about her constantly. "When is Elle coming back? Did she call? Can I wear my cape to school so she'll see me?" Ethan would bend down, hold his son's shoulders, and say gently, "I don't think she's coming back, buddy." But Jamie only shook his head with the unshakable certainty of a child who believes in things adults have long abandoned. Eventually, the questions grew less frequent. But Ethan noticed the way Jamie clutched the cape at night, how he folded it carefully after play, how his eyes searched the crowd at school events, just in case. The hope was quieter now, but it hadn't died. Then came Christmas Eve. The shop closed early, and Ethan worked until the last customer had driven off, the garage echoing with the clang of tools and the faint carols drifting from the town square. He finally locked up, exhaustion pressing into his bones, and walked to the truck where Jamie had already curled up in the back seat. The boy was asleep, the streetlight painting soft shadows across his face. He had wrapped himself in the cape, the golden letters of his name glinting faintly under the light. Clutched against his chest was an envelope addressed in uneven crayon letters, "To Mommy for a day." Ethan slid into the driver's seat and just sat there, staring at the envelope in his son's hands. His heart thudded, his breath catching. Slowly, careful not to wake him, he eased the letter free and unfolded it. Inside, written in blocky, crooked words, was Jamie's plea. "Dear Mommy, for a day? I don't want it to be just a day anymore." Ethan pressed the paper to his forehead, eyes burning. For months he had told himself he was protecting Jamie by keeping distance, by pretending Elle's presence had been a passing kindness. But now, with his son's small body curled in sleep, holding on to hope with both hands, Ethan felt something in himself fracture. This wasn't just about him anymore. It never had been. He looked at Jamie, the cape draped around him like a blanket, and understood. The boy had chosen. He wanted her, not as a visitor, not as a ghost of memory, but as part of their life. And Ethan, whether he admitted it or not, wanted the same. The decision came not as a burst, but as a quiet certainty. He started the truck, heart pounding, and turned the wheel not toward home, but toward the highway. Bags were hastily packed, Jamie barely stirring as Ethan carried him inside long enough to grab clothes, the cape folded carefully on top. Hours later, in the dark stretch of night, the truck hummed steadily along the road to New York City. The napkin with her address, scribbled months ago in passing, sat on the dashboard like a compass. For the first time in years, Ethan felt something unfamiliar stirring beneath the grief, something dangerous but undeniable: hope. The city felt like another planet compared to Maple Hill. Towering glass buildings stretched toward the sky, their lights glowing against the cold December night. Ethan guided the truck through streets slick with rain, the wipers sweeping back and forth in a steady rhythm. Jamie, drowsy but awake now, leaned forward between the seats, the cape still around his shoulders. "Are we really going to see her, Daddy?" he asked, voice full of fragile hope. Ethan glanced at him in the rearview mirror. "We're going to try, buddy." His voice was steadier than he felt. Inside, nerves twisted tight. What if she didn't want to see them? What if she had already moved on, built walls too high for them to climb? They finally pulled up outside a skyscraper whose marble lobby gleamed even from the street. Ethan parked, lifted Jamie into his arms, and walked through the revolving doors. The air inside smelled faintly of polished stone and winter roses, too clean, too perfect. At the front desk, Ethan cleared his throat. "Could you page Eleanor Summers, please?" The receptionist glanced up, polite but firm. "I'm sorry, sir. Ms. Summers resigned from the company months ago. She no longer works here." The words landed like a punch. Ethan shifted Jamie on his hip, the weight suddenly heavy. He was about to turn away when the elevator doors slid open with a soft chime. And there she was, not in her immaculate white suit, but in jeans and sneakers, her hair loose, her face unguarded. She froze, her hands trembling as if she'd seen a ghost. For a heartbeat, the lobby was silent except for the hum of the heaters. Then Jamie wriggled free of Ethan's arms, his small voice carrying across the marble floor. "Mommy!" Elle dropped everything she was holding. Her bag slid to the ground, paper scattering. She ran, arms wide, and Jamie launched into her embrace, the cape billowing behind him like wings. She held him so tightly Ethan wondered if she'd ever let go. When she finally looked up at Ethan, her eyes shone with tears. No words came at first, just a look that said everything she hadn't dared to write in her letter. Ethan stepped closer, his throat tight, and whispered, "We should have come sooner." From that night on, she didn't just visit on weekends. She came back with them to Maple Hill. Quietly, without spectacle, she bought the local tech center, breathed life into it, and hired half the town. She opened a children's foundation in her sister's name, turning her grief into something that gave other kids the kind of chance her sister never had. But most of all, she gave Jamie the mother he had dreamed of, and Ethan something he never thought he'd find again: a partner who chose not to stand above the world, but to kneel down and share it. Months later, under the arch of yellow leaves behind the Reynolds house, she stood in a simple white dress, Ethan's hand in hers, Jamie beaming between them. The vows were quiet, spoken not for cameras or headlines, but for the three of them alone. And as the wind carried the leaves around them, Ethan understood something he hadn't before. Sometimes the most powerful people are the ones who choose to love quietly, to stay, to become family. And sometimes, when you least expect it, family doesn't just find you, it saves you.